Let me come to a specific clause of the India-US joint statement. It says, and I'm quoting, in the event of any changes to the agreed upon tariffs of either country, the United States and India agree that the other country may modify its commitments. In other words, if one country changes its tariffs, the other country can modify its commitments. And since US tariffs have altered very substantially, would you suggest that India should invoke this clause?
India should invoke this clause, and India should write to the US that everything on which deal was premised is gone now. So what's the justification for the deal? What's the special concession for India? And India should use this clause and come out of the agreement altogether.
Now that's a very important point you've made. Your advice is that India shouldn't just invoke this clause seeking to modify the agreement, it should actually scrap the agreement altogether.
Absolutely, yes. There is no logic for the agreement. I think the same way will be adopted by most other countries which have entered the agreement. We are lucky that agreement is not yet implemented. We are just in the talking phase. Despite the joint statement, we are just in the talking phase. 15% have not been reduced to 18%. So agreement has not been implemented yet from any side, US side or Indian side. So we are in lucky phase that we are not walking out of an implemented agreement. But we'll see the countries where agreement has been implemented, they also walking out.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. On Friday, the United States Supreme Court declared President Trump's reciprocal tariffs illegal and scrapped them. In response, an angry and defiant president imposed 15% global tariffs on all goods from all countries. So today we ask, where does this leave the India-US trade deal that we are in the process of finalizing? Are there grounds for rethinking it, or would that provoke the American president's wrath? Those are the essential issues I shall raise today with the founder of the Global Trade Research Initiative and one of India's trade experts, Ajay Srivastava. Ajay Srivastava, the India-US joint statement, which outlines the framework for an interim trade agreement, promised to reduce the reciprocal tariffs on Indian exports to America from 25% to 18%, although that hasn't happened as yet. But on Friday, the United States Supreme Court declared Trump's reciprocal tariffs illegal and scrapped them. In response, Trump has imposed a 15% global tariff on all goods from all countries. Does this mean that the interim trade agreement India is negotiating has become unnecessary because India now faces 15% tariffs and not 18%, which the interim agreement was intended to secure?
Karan, let's understand the terms of the deal. So US from its side offered to cut its reciprocal tariff on India from 25% to 18%. We were slightly happy because this 18% was slightly lower than the tariffs offered by US onto other countries. For example, China was paying 34%, Bangladesh 19%, Vietnam 20%. So there was some benefit we were getting for our exports to the US. In return, we offered many deep concessions. But now with the US Supreme Court judgment, everything changes. And what happens is that anybody, even if they have deal trade deal with the US or no trade deal with the US will be charging a uniform tariff of 15% plus whatever was the most favored nation tariffs. So a country has a deal, same tariff. You don't have a deal, same tariff. So what's the point in giving so many concessions when I don't get any special treatment from the US?
Absolutely. So, as a result of the global tariffs being just 15%, 3% lower than what we were promised through the trade deal has become unnecessary, maybe even questionable.
Yes, not only because 18% has come down to 15%, 15% is available to everybody even without a trade deal. Countries who are doing trade deal have no special benefit, no further downing of tariff below 15%. And Trump administration has said Indian exports will be paying 15% plus MFN tariffs. So even if you have a deal or no deal, everybody is equal.
Before I come to talk about the consequences for the India US trade deal, let me ask you a few questions about American tariffs. Now that reciprocal tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act have been struck down by the US Supreme Court, is there any other way Trump can reimpose reciprocal tariffs?
Few limited means are available, but none give them as sweeping power as Mr. Trump has used through IEPA. So I'll give you some examples of some provisions in different acts which are available. First is Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. So it can be applied in a very limited way when US feels that their national security is at threat. So US is already applying this for charging tariffs at the rate of 50% on steel, aluminum. It could be anybody's guess how steel, aluminum imports are a threat to national security. But this is a tariff, and here he cannot charge different tariffs from different countries. It has to be uniform tariff for all countries. Next is Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. US uses this frequently. For example, they used it in China. For India, they use it many times. For last they used was in 2020, 2021, when they said our equalization levies on their digital tech firms, they were not good. And then in 2020, 2014, they again threatened India for its Patent Act and India putting some restrictions on the import of medical device from the US. So they keep on threatening us, but these are specific restrictions US can put after a lot of investigation. One more section is there, Section 122 of the same Act, US Trade Act of 1974, which US has just used for introducing new tariffs at the rate of 15% for 150 days. So these are few options, but none give Trump a sweeping power to impose tariffs on whole of the world.
So, in a nutshell, Trump does have a few powers he can use, but none give him the sweeping powers that he had under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And therefore, his capacity to reimpose reciprocal tariffs is very limited.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Now, there's a second point about Trump's new 15% global tariffs. They've been imposed under Section 122 of the US Trade Act of 1974, and the important thing is they expire in 150 days. Can he renew them, or is that unlikely, or does it require congressional approval, which he may not get?
So, this US Department of Justice, during the hearing at the Supreme Court of this case, they already submitted that the Section 122 doesn't give power to the president to impose tariffs because on trade deficit grounds. Trump has imposed tariff on trade deficit grounds, but the Section 122 deals with the balance of payment issues. Balance of payment issues no more exist. When US shifted to fully convertible currency in 1973, then from that moment this issue stopped being relevant. And Mr. Neil Katyal, who is the attorney who was responsible for fighting the case in Supreme Court against Trump tariffs, he is very sure, he is gone on record that these tariffs will not survive. They'll be challenged immediately and US will have to withdraw it. So if I have to in brief I say these tariffs are not going to last even 150 days. They have to be withdrawn before that.
You're suggesting that there's a likelihood that some serious American court could strike down the use of the Section 122 tariffs even for 150 days. That could be struck down.
Yeah, this is all over, and everybody says because that it uses the term balance of payment and not trade deficit, and everybody feels that it is a wrong section to be used.
Which means that even the 15% global tariffs which were imposed on Friday and Saturday face an uncertain future. They may not last the full 150 days.
They will not last. That's what everybody is discussing. So what I sense is that now Mr. Trump may start a cat and mouse game with the Supreme Court. For example, Trump introduced tariffs for the first time in, say, April last year. And US Court of International Trade passed judgment on May 28 last year. And then Supreme Court judgment came in February, now a few days before. So about 9 to 10 months it takes. So this is the time Mr. Trump may use. So he may introduce something like Section 122, knowing fully well it's not going to last, and he knows that judicial processes may take 7, 8, 9, 10 months, and then he loses the case and he may jump onto some other tariff sections to impose tariffs. But everything becomes highly unstable.
I hear what you're saying, that Trump will try and play the judicial game, hoping he can spin things out for 7, 8 months. But the first problem he faces is that the Section 122 tariffs expire in 150 days. Even if the judicial process goes on beyond the 150 days, in 150 days' time, those global tariffs imposed under Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act will expire. To renew them, does he not need congressional approval? And is that going to be forthcoming?
Yeah, it's built in the act that if he wants to continue beyond 150 days, then he has to get the US congressional approval. That will not be coming because he will be using act in a bad way. For example, it's not about BOP problem, it's a trade deficit, which is not applicable for this act.
So there are very serious question marks about how long these global tariffs that were imposed on Friday and Saturday can last. That's the next point you're making. There are very serious question marks.
So Neil Katyal says there is no point Mr. Trump can pull this for long, and if he really wants to impose tariffs on the countries, he has to approach US Congress, persuade them to impose tariffs. It's the authority of the Congress, not that of the president.
And given the slender majority he has in the House of Representatives in particular, and given that many Republicans are not supporters of his tariff policy, he may not be able to pass an extension through the House of Representatives. That's the next problem.
Karan, that already has proven. In last Wednesday, what happened? Mr. Trump wanted to impose some tariffs on Canada, and House has majority of the Republicans, but 6 Republicans, they have crossed the floor and voted against the bill. The bill fell. So House of Representatives was trying to give a message to the Supreme Court. I think everybody in House of Representatives or Supreme Court or US industrialists, population in general, they feel that President is transgressing his authority.
Let me raise one more question, and I'm going back to the reciprocal tariffs. Whilst they existed, they gave India a small comparative trade advantage over competitor countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Thailand. But now that the reciprocal tariffs have been declared illegal and scrapped, that small comparative trade advantage has also gone out of the window. Now, India, like every other country in the world, faces 15% tariffs. We're not better than Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Thailand. We're exactly the same.
So murmurs have already started. You're right, murmurs already started. European Union has issued a statement yesterday. They say we are seeking clarifications from the US because they committed $750 billion worth of investment in US. Japan has issued a statement that their investment pledge is just a signaling. Australia says we are very unhappy with this and we are looking into this. So everybody is feeling like that. India should also be very forthcoming about its next course of action.
Absolutely. And 2 countries that are most concerned are the UK and Australia because they, under the reciprocal tariffs, had 10% tariffs. Now, under the global tariffs, it's gone up to 15. They are very concerned.
And worse, Australia has a trade deficit with the US, unlike most other countries. and still they are facing 15% tariff.
Absolutely. So there are serious question marks, but the point I want to underline is whatever small comparative trade advantage India believed it had got over competitors countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Thailand, that small competitive trade advantage has gone.
Is zero.
It's zero, absolutely. Then, in that case, Mr. Srivastava, against this background, let's come to the India US joint statement, which outlines the framework of an interim trade agreement. In the statement, India agreed to many concessions, such as reducing MFN tariffs, aligning its economic policies with US interests, easing regulations affecting US goods, and committing to purchase up to 500 billion worth of US goods over the next 5 years. Now, is it your position that these concessions are no longer warranted?
Karan, even when they were being discussed, when US was in position to offer us lower tariffs from 25% to 18%, I was not happy with what India agreed to concede to them. For example, agreeing to align our economic security aspect with the US is no good for a big country, sovereign country like India. This means if US has a tussle with China, we also had a tussle with China, which means China will be taking action against us. Maybe if they stop supplying, say, APIs to us, what will happen to our pharma industry? I can count on 100 such products. So we have to think through before committing such things. And there are many other things, like you rightly said, $500 billion of commitment. Why one-sided? Why a rich country is not committing? Why a developing country is committing? So many things. But now, let's forget about those things. We were committing this rightly, wrongly, because we were getting some tariff relief over other countries, competitor countries. Now everybody is at the equal. People without the deal are at the same footing as people with the deal. So where's the point of any concession? Forget about so many concessions.
So, in a nutshell, those concessions that may have been arguably acceptable earlier now are unwarranted.
Absolutely.
Against this background, let me come to a specific clause of the India US joint statement. It says, and I'm quoting, in the event of any changes to the agreed upon tariffs of either country, the United States and India agree that the other country may modify its commitments. In other words, if one country changes its tariffs, the other country can modify its commitments. And since US tariffs have altered very substantially, would you suggest that India should invoke this clause?
India should invoke this clause, and India should write to the US that everything on which deal was premised is gone now. So what's the justification for the deal? What's the special concession for India? And India should use this clause and come out of the agreement altogether.
Now, that's a very important point you've made. Your advice is that India shouldn't just invoke this clause seeking to modify the agreement, it should actually scrap the agreement altogether.
Absolutely, yes. There is no logic for the agreement. I think the same way will be adopted by most other countries which have entered the agreement. We are lucky that agreement is not yet implemented. We are just in the talking phase, despite the joint statement. We are just in the talking phase. 15% have not been reduced to 18%. So agreement has not been implemented yet from any side, US side or Indian side. So we are in lucky phase that we are not walking out of an implemented agreement. But we'll see the countries where agreement has been implemented, they're also walking out.
Today's papers report that the trade delegation that was supposed to travel to the United States on Sunday has postponed its departure. Both sides have accepted that the trade delegation will only go when there's greater clarity. Do you think that the government is actually thinking along your lines? That they've begun to realize that they need to, if not scrap the agreement, at least seriously modify it, which is why that delegation has been postponed?
I can't read government's mind, but this looks very normal to me because US side must be on fire. They must have said, wait for some time. So I don't read anything into this.
So we don't have any clarity about what the government is doing. One can't interpret from the delegation postponing its departure that the government is considering modifying or scrapping the deal.
Yes, we can't guess from this.
Now, on Friday night, Trump, in response to a question at his press conference, publicly declared that the India-US trade deal is on, and as he put it, nothing changes. So now, if India seeks to modify or scrap the agreement, won't this provoke his wrath? And might he not seek to impose even steeper tariffs on India or find some other way of targeting India? In other words, he will respond like an angry woman scorned.
So he has been threatening us, disparaging us routinely, and I'm very sad that we don't respond back. Most countries respond, we don't respond back, and that's why he takes so much liberty in talking anything against us. He calls us dead economy, he calls us names, he calls us anything, and we should be ready that if we walk out, he may be threatening us with the imposition of like Section 301 of Trade Act of 1974. We should be ready. He has earlier used that section. He may be using some more section, but we are a sovereign big country. We should not be taken by the threats of all these things. We should calculate what's in the short term, long term interest of the country. Right now, I don't see any benefit doing a trade deal under the current circumstances. If circumstances change, we can think de novo about everything.
So you're saying something very important. You're saying, regardless of the fact that seeking to modify or even scrap the deal may provoke Trump's wrath, let that happen. We shouldn't be worried about his wrath.
Because even if you sign a trade deal, he is going to find 10 more things against you and press you for further concessions outside the trade deal. Like stopping buying of Russian oil was one. There could be so many coming.
So you're very clear. This is a moment to scrap the trade deal with America.
Yes, yes.
My last question, given that it was widely expected that the US Supreme Court would declare Trump's tariffs illegal, and that was a concern that Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, shared in public several weeks ago, should India have tried to delay the joint statement till after the Supreme Court verdict was known? Jairam Ramesh has made this point in a tweet on Saturday. What's your view?
So, many people were very clear that the verdict is coming. It will be coming against the US president. In fact, Wall Street Journal reported at June end that 80% chances that it will be against Trump, and verdict is likely to come between February 20 and 26. But so the question is why Indian government did not delay it. My thinking, I don't have a clue why it was delayed, but my thinking is Indian government did not know when deal is going to be announced. It was all in Mr. Trump's hands. We see the statement of Indian public officials. The past year, they say deal is going to happen this month, next month. So I read it, they didn't have a clue when deal is going to be announced. So everything was left on to Trump. Now, question is why Trump was dealing the deal with India when he was signing deals with other countries. So initially, we were given to understand that maybe he's unhappy with us because we didn't allow him to take credit of stopping the India-Pakistan war. But now I think there was a more tangible reason. That was not the reason enough. The tangible reason was, he imposed 25% tariffs, reciprocal tariff on us. He imposed 25% additional tariffs because we were buying oil from Russia. And he now says that Indian side has committed, of course, Indian side has not gone on public on this, but he says Indian side has committed that India will stop buying Russian oil. So I am removing this 25% tariff. Now, suppose he could not have done deal with India 2 months back because India was still buying Russian oil. Then suppose he did a deal with India removing 25% to lowering 25% to 18%, what could have been the total tariff on India? 25% of Russian oil would have continued because we were still buying Russian oil. So 25% plus 18%, 43%, that means no deal. No deal. That would not have make any sense. Now he says that Indian side is committed, no Russian oil buying, and that's how it makes sense. So the deal timing is announced by Mr. Trump when India said it will not be buying Russian oil. That's why deal did not happen earlier.
So you do believe that the reason why the deal happened now rather than earlier is because India, without going public about it, agreed to reduce buying Russian oil, and all the reports we're getting from Kepler and other sources that track oil suggest that India's purchase of Russian oil has come down very substantively. It may have even halved compared to what it was a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
So it was India bending the knee over Russian oil that made Trump agree to the deal now.
Yes, that was the situation.
Which is why we were not in a position to delay the deal till after the Supreme Court verdict was announced, because the truth was we didn't know when it would happen. When he agreed to do it, it came as a big surprise to us, one that we accepted and welcomed.
Now, Karan, one more thing, with reciprocal tariff gone, even if hypothetically we start buying oil from Russia, he doesn't have those reciprocal tariff to impose upon us for buying oil. He has to find some other excuse, some other section to punish us.
So once again, the threat that made us reduce the purchase of Russian oil has been lifted. And if we want, we can go back to purchasing Russian oil. Trump will find it very difficult to punish us a second time.
Yes.
That's a very important point that you've raised. It hasn't been in the press up till now. I wonder if the government itself is aware of it. I thank you, Mr. Srivastava, for the time you've given me. I thank you for your understanding, and I thank you for very boldly and clearly saying that the time has now come for India not just to seek to modify the India-US trade deal, but to scrap it altogether. The concessions that India made were possibly unjustified earlier. Now they're clearly unwarranted. Have I summed that up correctly?
Yes, Karan, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.